All right. We are going to get started here in a second. Our MC is out of town. He had the audacity to go visit family. And I told him, you're supposed to be here with us. But so I'm going to be the MC today and the host. So, welcome you all. I appreciate you all for being here today. I am excited about this conversation. Someone told me, said, should we be excited about this? I'm like, yes, because this is where we come together and have conversation, some of the hard conversations. And I really love that we do that because I think we all need spaces for that. So we are going to watch a quick, short video, and then we will get started and have our panelists come in. So if we can get the lights, please. All right, we are going to welcome our guests in. We have Marilyn. Chancey. Rachel. Christine. Dana. And Gabby. Just go on to the last chair there. Thank you. Thank you all. Yeah, give them a hand. All right, welcome. We are going to go ahead and get started. You guys good? Y'all ready? All right.
Get it.
All right. Yeah. So I want to welcome you all to part 3 of the Who We Are series. We are searching. Today we touch on a small part of our adult journey, the search for answers. Grief is an interesting beast that I've had yet to find a way to tame, or at best understand it. Today we will journey through moments in our lives where grief has shown up. Often we as a society equate grief with the loss of a loved one, which is actually correct. But in addition to that, grief is also experienced in many different ways. So we're going to discuss that today. Okay? So grief involves coping with loss. And I think sometimes the reason why this conversation is really important to me is that I think we do equate it with just the loss of a person when they transition on, right? Which is very valid. But I don't think we talk about the other parts of grief, right? That we have to struggle through and work through in our lives. So some examples of loss is like divorce, children, sometimes like if they choose a different direction in life, right? Sometimes as adults and parents, we try to navigate their lives for them. We also can, sometimes we're going to touch on today addiction, right? And kind of how that recovery looks and how you have to almost kind of grieve the loss of what could have been and what is new to come, right? So let's go ahead and get started with that. So grief. Does anybody want to kind of start to talk about how grief has impacted them personally, just in their personal journey and what it looks like for you? Because grief looks different for all of us, right? Some people like to kind of emotionally eat when they grieve. Some people will start to run or get very active. Some people kind of become a recluse. Some people start to become a lot more visible, right? To kind of mask it. So what does grief kind of look like for you in your life? Go ahead, Chancey. I know you're right now.
So grief for me, especially so I struggle with substance use disorder. And one of the strange things, talking about different things that we grieve, I had to grieve my usage. So it would seem as though that wouldn't be something that I would grieve, but I had always approached it with the idea that it was harmful for me, so I should just not want to do it. But that was never very effective for me. I think what was more effective was the idea that this is something that I care about, even though it's hurting me. And I had to start to acknowledge that was a sacrifice. And then once I acknowledged that was a sacrifice, then I could be more strategic on the other side of how I continually make that sacrifice. Because I think with anything that is a mental construct, or at least in part, which is grief, it bubbles back up. So how do I move through that without ruminating on it so much that it becomes harmful and I become reclusive or other harmful ways of coping with it?
Yeah. We want to celebrate your sobriety too. Woo! Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Anybody else want to chime in? So yeah, go ahead, Gabby.
I think my grief fueled my profession. I'm the program director at the Children's Grief Center. And when I was in college, my Aunt Colette had stage 4 breast cancer and had a long journey, about 5 years, in and out of hospice. And so working with her through that process and feeling my grief and her grief led me to wanting to help others. And I see that with our volunteers and the people who touch the Grief Center, that they want to give back because of the impact that grief has had on them.
Yeah. Yes. Well, no. Marilyn?
Yeah. So several years ago, maybe like decades ago, I lost a sister to breast cancer, and she was sick, terminally ill for about 3 years. So I had a lot of anticipatory grief.
Right. Yeah.
So I would go to work. I would just sit at my desk. I would put my head down. I would just bawl my eyes out, just thinking about what she was going through. It was a terrible time, but we got more time with her than we thought we were going to have. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I did not like about that time, I was her advocate, but she didn't have the kind of death that I wanted her to have. First of all, she was terminally ill for 3 years, and we never talked about death. Never. Mm-hmm. And, I was there the day that the doctor told her and my mother and myself that there was nothing else they could do, that all of her resources had run out. And we still didn't talk about it. Mm-hmm. She had a couple weeks at that point, and we never discussed it. And there were things that I would have liked to have said to her. And I think there were things that she possibly could have wanted to say to me. And that's one of the reasons that I've become a death doula, is because of that, because I want to help other people through that and to make a person's death as good as it can be.
Sure. Yeah. Give them what you didn't have, right?
Given what I didn't have, because I know everybody's experience is different, but I have heard that is kind of a common theme, that people don't want to talk about death even up till the end.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned anticipatory grief, because I have this down here in regards to how we grieve something before it happens, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, people, that's where anxiety sometimes, kind of comes from, and depression sometimes. Does anybody want to talk a little bit more about that, like anticipatory grief? And I guess tonight, this is something different that we're doing tonight, but to kind of give tools, right? How do people deal with that, and how have you dealt with that? Kind of that anticipatory grief. So,
I
Dana,
certainly will. Yes.
Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Dana. I've been married to a wonderful man for 34 years. He's out there somewhere in the audience. But our first year of marriage, we experienced our first baby was stillborn. And so that anticipatory grief as we were trying to conceive and start a family, mm-hmm. I totally understand that every cycle we were grieving, mm-hmm. that we weren't pregnant. And also that first year of marriage, my husband was diagnosed with a chronic disabling illness. And so the anticipatory grieving of what our future was going to look like at that time is a real grief. You're grieving what you're fearing.
Yeah.
What you fear. And it does cause anxiety. And for us, it was a trauma response that led to decades long in a religion that was really not where we were supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so we were grieving the loss of our baby, grieving the loss of future strength for my husband. And then we grieved the loss of people that we thought were our family, but really were not. So anticipatory grief is really as significant as a loss.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just have to sit in that anticipation and that fear and invite that to sit with you.
Yeah.
And process through that grief. It's like you're kicking your feet to the surface underwater. And when you can finally break through that surface and get that first breath, you know that you're starting your healing.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that. Wow. Yeah. Anybody else want to add anything to that? Anticipatory
I
grief?
just wanted to say, so I have a similar story. My first daughter passed away of SIDS, so she was a few weeks old and very healthy. It didn't seem, it was just out of nowhere. And I went on to have 4 more kids. And with each kid, it got a little bit easier. But that first, my oldest, I didn't want to sleep at all. I just wanted to watch her. And so I understand that, because you also kind of go through like, oh, she looks a lot like Ava. It was just like surreal, the similarities, but it also, in a way, not that nobody could ever take Ava's place, but it kind of was like almost like a gift from her. And she was actually due on Ava's birthday. So it was some really cool coincidences like that. And it actually helped me. I mean, I still had a lot of work to do, but it helped me kind of get through some of it and heal a little better. I mean, I don't think I'll ever be completely healed, because I'll always, the what ifs and all of that, but I've got 4 beautiful kids now. So, so everything is okay. It's just, still got to deal with it every day.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. And I think that really is, did you want to add something, Gabby? Because you look like you.
Yeah, I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes with anticipatory grief, there's a misconception that after, like if it is a long-term illness, that after it won't be as bad as like a traumatic loss out of nowhere. And I think, but with anticipatory grief comes all these other feelings, like the guilt about feeling relieved, about having, your person finally out of pain, or the relief of not having to be a caregiver anymore. And then there's a guilt behind that. And there's just so many extra layers with anticipatory grief that not a lot of people think about.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Were you trying to say something?
Yeah. So it's strange that we open with this, because my father is getting older. He didn't have me till he was 42. So he's edging near the later part of his life, and we refuse to not talk about it. I'm glad that I came up with a family, because how do you work through them type of things? I think that for our family, we have really approached it with the idea that we're going to be open, honest, and transparent, not only for because we want to be intentional with the time that we're spending together, but also for means that oftentimes I see historically tear families apart, like the planning process, all these types of stuff that if I'm not intentional about it, it can be a sideswipe at a very, very challenging time. I refuse that. And I'm glad that my family, we speak about that type of stuff.
Yeah.
We speak about that type of stuff. And then we can, hopefully in the means that our emotions start to shape around the transparency of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you all think that we're in such denial of, we all know that, especially we talk about death, right? We know that it's coming for all of us at some point in time. I hope not today, and we can. But why do you think that we are in such denial of it, right? What do you think the fear?
Yeah.
Is it the facing of the like facing it eventually, or having to work through all those things that take place afterwards? Where does that denial come from? Because that is like usually like kind of like the first stage of grief, right? That denial, like it's not happening or it hasn't happened. Where do you think that comes from?
Self-preservation. You know, you're just trying to know that something's coming and or it has just happened and trying to survive that and saying, nope, I'm not going there.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. It's not me. It's not. I think it's just our desire and our need to be okay.
Yeah. And I think that's why because you mentioned religion earlier, and this is just my opinion, I think that's why some people choose that path in life, right? Religion sometimes, because it does give you some type of sense of something else, right? Where this is not the end, right? And I think that's why people do, believe, right, in that. So, but I want to talk a little bit because we kind of touched on it, that idea of grieving what could have been. Right. And I think that's something that a lot of people grieve, this idea of what my life could have been like, what their life could have been like. And that's in a lot of different ways. I mean, people get divorced. Sometimes our children take different paths. Like my son went to school and I hope he hears this. He went to school for 6 years. Right. And I'm like, oh, my goodness, he's going to do all these things. And now he's an MMA fighter, which is fine. But he could have done that without the 6 years of college. And I'm joking a little bit, but, it's this idea that, you have these plans that you plan for them, right? We can't help it. We naturally do it. And then they pivot and you do have to kind of grieve, right? That is a form of grieving, right? This idea that I kind of wish this for you and now you won't have it. And that's of course, lower level of that, but it does happen. So let's talk a little bit about that grieving what could have been, right? And Christine, would you like to touch on that?
Sure. I'm really nervous. I'm sorry.
I'm here.
Give me this hand.
Okay, we'll do this. I like it.
I got you.
So, the anticipatory, that word just kind of sticks with me because for me, my grief feels constant. It feels never ending because I was diagnosed bipolar. It's been over 20 years now, and it's been a constant battle. So the idea of what life would have been like, it's just,
wow,
who knows, right? Like I just have to ride this and battle it and struggle, and no day is the same as the next day. And it's taken so much from me, I feel. So some of it is, it's just so hard to put it into words because it's my life and it's my decisions, right? So I have to take responsibility for that. But then I have these demons, these chemicals in my brain that aren't right, these, whatever you want to call it. But it's called bipolar. And it took me a long time to just accept that and accept, okay, I need medication for the rest of my life. And this is just a part of me. So I think one of my biggest struggles is not defining myself by it, even though it is a huge defining factor. It's complicated. But I think when it comes to not wanting to talk about death, not wanting to talk about grief, people don't want to talk about mental illness either. I mean, it's getting better, but I don't even want to talk about it, and I feel it's important to, and that's why I'm here. But the fear of if you talk about the death, that makes it real. If you're talking about, this is what I'm going through, this is how my medicines are working, this is what's happening, it's real. You can't just keep walking through life day by day and act like it's not happening. So I think we all have to just find that balance of like dealing with what is and how we're really feeling or what we're really experiencing versus what we'd hope that we would be experiencing. And that's definitely every day. I wish every day was easier and better, but I have to deal with what is,
Yeah.
Christine, you may feel like it's taken so much from you, but I just want to tell you that when I walked in and saw you, my first thought was, look at how much she glows and gives. It may feel like it's taken so much from you, but you are overflowing.
I just feel it's time to start talking about it. I mean, it's been over 20 years and I really there's so much shame. There's shame in things that I've done in my life that I blame on the fact that I wasn't medicated or I was, or what, with my bipolar. And there's just a lot of things in my life that I have shame about with that. But it just feels like it's time to be open about it and talk about it. And maybe it'll help somebody else, or maybe it'll just help people understand a little more. but hopefully it helps somewhat.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I agree. We should talk about it, right? But it is hard. It's hard because there is a stigma with a lot of things. I mean, some people are still afraid to say they got divorced.
Sure.
Right? Because people judge them based on that. So there's a stigma around a lot of things. We are judgy and we need to stop that, right? Because we all have different paths and walks, and it's okay. And we have different things that we have to navigate through. It's just life, right? So again, about what could have been, right? This idea of what my life would have been like, if this person was still here. And then Chancey, you touched on something in regards to when people are getting older, right? There is a grieving part to that, right? Because and I think for them too, probably. I mean, I'm not older yet, right? I'm still,
No.
but I'm sure that there is a part with them where it's this idea, when you watch people start to age and if they can't do this stuff anymore that, you're used to seeing them do or things of that nature, I'm sure they're going through it too. So I guess I want to ask y'all, let's get to this. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. We're going to come back, but how can people show up for people who are grieving, right? Or in that process? Because Anne-Marie, and I want to make sure I say this too, because Anne-Marie is here as a therapist in case anybody wants to talk. I wanted to make sure we had someone here in case anybody wants to talk during this, if you need to step out or after she is here. I think that is what we need to have happen. If you need it, she is here. But I was talking to her in preparation for this conversation, and I was asking, I'm going to ask you all the same question. Do we grieve people who are no longer here? I mean, who are here more than we grieve people who are no longer here? And what I mean by that is I've lost friendships. I've lost people in my life. And I thought, I have to grieve this relationship, right? I have to grieve this relationship. And what she said to me when we were talking and having coffee was that, because, when someone passes on, you have a funeral, people come bring you cakes and food and stuff like that. They sit with you for hours, stay over at your house. They come and, they talk soft to you all the time and, do this, and they take you places. But when you grieve other things in your life, loss of career, relationships, nobody is really there, right? So you have to kind of do that process by yourself. So do you all think that sometimes it's harder to grieve people who are still living? I always think about mourning the life of a person that's still here. Sure. It's hard because you see them at the grocery store, and places. What do you all think about that? Gabby?
I think, there's a lot to that, especially because I feel like there's always a little piece of hope that you can still reconnect, or that things will go back to the way they used to be. And with grief from a death, you know for a fact that it's not going back. So it's not easier, but it's a different type of grief.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that?
Good point.
So my kids don't have their dad in their life, and he's alive and well. And they are kind of in that situation where they are grieving someone that's still, around. And so that kind of just hits home for me because I grieve along with them, everything that they feel and everything they're going through. I take it on myself because that's how I am as a mom. But it's like I've talked to my oldest about it a lot, and she just feels like it'd be almost easier if he wasn't even around, because it's like they think about him all the time and they miss him, but yet we know that that's just the way it is right now. And it's like, how do you, as a parent for the kids, like I have a really hard time, helping them through it, I guess, and being strong for them, even though it breaks my heart as well. So that definitely, that kind of grief is very, very difficult. And I think in some ways it is harder because of, they're somewhere, they're around.
Yeah. Marilyn, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely harder if there are people or situations still in your life that are there as a possibility. You've lost the dream, but they're still there. And sometimes it's an ego hit. Why couldn't this have worked? Why couldn't why couldn't I have been good enough? Why couldn't, things have just turned out the way that I wanted to? Sometimes it's just that, that the suffering is so much that you don't want to ever see them again. You don't want to. Sometimes you lost a job. Sometimes you don't want to see the people you worked with again. It's embarrassment. Or you see the person that you used to have a relationship with, and that's embarrassment. Or you just, like I said, you have the ego hit or something. It's much, much easier if they just don't exist at all. Sure. If somebody passes away at some point in time, you do grieve them. It's not that you don't. And it's not that it's going to be immediate that you get over it. You may grieve them for years, but the possibility is gone.
Yeah. I hate to use the word closure, but there's some type of end, so to speak, right?
There is an end.
Right. Yes. And then you can kind of navigate through that. And, and one thing, I really thought about that hard when I was preparing for this, in regards to when we lose people that are still here, right? And I wonder sometimes, is it that we miss them, or do we miss how we felt with them, right? So if you have a friend that you went to the movies with, and I don't know, went and had popcorn and all this stuff, and you laughed, you remember being happy in those moments, right? So could anybody fill that void? Who knows, right? If somebody else goes with you to the movies and you have fun and you feel good again, maybe that's what you need. But I was thinking about that. Is it always the person, or is it how you felt when you were with them? That joy you had, the fun. And so I think, because I thought about for myself, like people that I've lost in my life as far as friendships, it's like, am I okay with not having them? Because sometimes they were not the best friends, but I enjoyed my time with them, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes I'm grieving that, how I felt with them, right? Not necessarily them, right? Mm-hmm. So, okay. Anybody else want to add anything to that, Chance?
I think also not just grieving how you felt, but who you were. Yeah. Like who you were as a person and your identity, because that completely can shift when you don't talk to someone anymore.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
So I think so it's strange because I think about that a lot, what you're just talking about. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my previous relationships, I think I just love me through them. So this last relationship was a touch different. And when I stepped into recovery, they didn't. So the grieving process was really challenging because it was coupled with guilt. Mm-hmm. I felt like I got out and they didn't.
Just survivor's guilt. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So plus, it's especially depending on how the relationship ended. If it's around romantic relationships in particular, it might be, if it ended on a bad note or through deception, there might have to be a reshuffling of all your context around all your previous memories, which is a whole nother layer to the grieving process, and a reshaping of right down to almost your identity in relationship to this person. So it can get very complicated, and very layered, and especially when we don't talk about it. Yeah, it's so tragic when these deep-rooted emotions are captivated away in the back of our minds because, for one reason or another. I've never seen any benefit from keeping it buried. Sure.
Yeah. Eventually you will explode or implode. Sure. There's only two options with that, right? When you keep things in, you're either going to explode or implode. Yep. And what that looks like can be different for all of us, but that will eventually happen. And I remember when I was talking about doing, the series, and then this part of it being about grief, someone asked me, why grief, right? Why do you want to talk about grief? That's sad. And it's like, well, we want to feel all the things. Yep. We want to, this is a part of life, right? Things that we talk about at this table is all the things. Yep. And we have to talk about and create spaces to be able to talk about what we're going through, what we're battling, what we're struggling with, and then hopefully give people gifts on how to struggle well, right? Because we all struggle at some point in time in our lives, but how do we struggle well? So I want to go back to the question of, when you are grieving, right? And Dana, you mentioned, I mean, you grieved, and I think a lot of people haven't grieved that, where they've left, how do I want to say this, a religion or a religious institution, right? And they had to grieve the relationships, friendships, and kind of grieve what could have been, right? Because you plan this life surrounded around this idea, and I'm saying that for lack of a better word right now. And then you have to grieve that. So I guess my question is, how can people show up for you through the grieving process? How do we do it when you are in recovery, when you've lost a child, when you're battling and coming to terms with, your life, leaving a religion, or, kind of looking at how life will be, with a different diagnosis, right? How do we show up? Because I am one of those people that I never know what to say. I want to be there. I will cry with you. I will hug you. I don't know if I should say I'm sorry. I don't know if I should say it'll be okay. Like, what do I say, right? So I'm the person that I just start doing things, right? Like, what do you need me to do? Because I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I also don't want to not say anything. And then you think I'm a jerk for not saying anything, right? And I think a lot of people struggle with that. What do we say? How do we show up for you? And I'm even speaking, for myself. How do we show up for someone when they're grieving?